Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Illumineers Quest podcast, where we talk everything Lorcana, not just the newly announced co-op game in Lorcana. I'm Zach, and today we have a very special guest joining us. We have pro player RMB that's going to have a conversation with us and help us in our endeavor to get the Stitch card and playmat for the set championships. So without further ado, we have a really great conversation ahead of us, so let's just jump right into it. All right, and everyone, welcome to the podcast RMB, the professional player on Labyrinth Gaming. And RMB, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, man. Really do appreciate it.
Yeah, I think this is like perfect timing. You know, I think we're what, basically, 3 weeks away now from the set championships starting, in a lot of local communities. I've got signed up for mine, and I know a lot of people are getting signed up for theirs too. And so, as we get into like that kind of swing of the final stretch of this set and getting into that set championships, I think, you have a lot of knowledge that you can drop on us and hopefully help out some of the listeners get ready for their own set championship. So yeah, it's really exciting to have you on, and hopefully, yeah, we can all learn something in conjunction with your knowledge.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's one of the things that I've kind of taken as being a part of this community. I like to be a teacher. If I have learned something or I know something, I feel like it's my civic responsibility to bestow that knowledge upon others. I've always kind of taken that traditional, teacher style role. I'll learn something, become a master at it, and then try to teach that to other people, because ultimately I like playing games at a very, very high competitive level. And if I know something and my opponents don't, I feel like there's a disadvantage. So if I can teach someone something, it makes them a better player in the long run, which in turn makes the games that I play against them more worthwhile. I want to play against the best players in the world to see, am I really good enough? That's the biggest thing, is really kind of testing myself. It's a little bit selfish, but, I want to see how I stack up against the best players in the world.
No, I think that's really insightful, and to a lot of senses, I feel the same way. It's much different paths, I guess, to give some background, and for some of the new listeners that maybe are coming in from your side, this is my first TCG, and I was super intimidated going into the first couple weeks of League, because I knew there were a bunch of people that had a lot of experience and didn't want to make some mistakes and make them mad or whatever. But yeah, the community has been fantastic, and I've learned a ton from people locally. And so it's great to kind of see that, continue at the highest level. But yeah, from your respects on like wanting to be the best and beat the best, like, yeah, if you want to be the best in the world, which is, I think, where you're at in this whole scene we're in right now, then yeah, you want to beat everybody at their best so that you can truly say at the end of the day, I'm the best there is, which when you have that opportunity to do so, I think is incredibly exciting.
Well, I'm definitely not the best, especially considering like some of the people that are very close to me, friends of mine, like Brennan DeCandio, for instance. I've known Brennan since he was 16 years old. We both played Magic at the same local card shop. Like, wow. When I go to League, Brennan and I are both at the same league for Lorcana. So it's like I play against him. I play against one of my teammates, Humble. Like, I live in Central Florida, and Central Florida just has an overabundance of incredibly talented TCG players across every TCG that you can think of. Like, it is an absolute shark pool in this area. So it's kind of one of those like get good or get out type scenarios.
Yeah. I mean, that's
like
insane.
my set championships are going to include Brennan. Like, the set championships I'm going to has Brennan there. So like, if I have to come in second, like at least it's him. I think he's arguably the best Lorcana player in the world right now. That's just my personal opinion, just from all of the absolute rock stars and goats. When you consider some of the big names in Lorcana right now, obviously one of the first ones you're going to think of is Brennan DeCandio, Zach Bivens, Nicholas Rausch, Kurt Spice, Michael Ferranti. Saviz is an old Hearthstone pro that has recently jumped over to Lorcana and just took first on both ladders. Like, an absolute legend when it comes to like card games. So I would like to be considered in the top 25. I don't know that I necessarily am, but it's the goal of mine is to be considered one of those upper echelon players in the game.
Yeah, I mean, DeCandio just won another massive tournament, and it never ceases to amaze me because someone as an outsider, like looking at these high level games, it's like how when there's so much variability in the game, your the player's ability to like overcome some of that inconsistency that you have by the randomness of the deck is just fascinating and mind blowing that people can be that good at something like this. It's just so fascinating to watch, and which is why I wanted to have you on and to get some of your expertise in some of those scenarios. So
Yeah, I think the thing that's like, and I'm still trying to wrap my mind around this, but going into cut to top 16, Brennan is in 16th place. So he's already in an uphill battle. He plays out 4 rounds on the draw.
Yeah.
for at least 2 out of his 3 games and still spikes every single round. Like, I know a lot of people have had some pretty big concerns around the what feels like the play draw dependency in Disney Lorcana, and I think that a lot of the statistics that have come out around that have been specific to Pixelborn data, which it's great that we have a data subset, not just not diminishing that whatsoever, but I think that when you're looking at the top 100 players on the Pixelborn server, you're looking at some of the best players in the world as it stands already. Look at any of these big tournaments that are going on across the world, and the people that are winning are the people that are consistently, top 25 ranked in Pixelborn. So you're looking at that data. If you take the best player and you give them the opportunity to play first, like for sure the disparity between play draw is going to be pretty high. However, when you go to paper events, there's a large disparity between your beginner level players, your middle of the pack players, and then your top tier players. I think that the better you get at the game, the easier it becomes to identify ways for you to win the game, which I think is one of the most important parts of any TCG. I treat TCGs like a game of chess in a lot of situations, because you are looking not necessarily how to stop your opponent from winning the game, but also how to win the game yourself. So identifying the lines that give you the greatest opportunity to win the game is incredibly important, and regardless of whether you're going first or you're going second, a top tier player is going to have that as an advantage for them.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I think when any time you have a competitor at a high level and they're given an advantage, they take the biggest opportunity like that and make the most of it. And so going first is an advantage. And so when you have it, to your point, when you have a top player, they're going to always take advantage of that they're given, whereas a middle of the pack player or a newcomer might not have that same mentality or have the same knowledge to be able to do so. And so I agree. I think there's a little bit of a disparity, but probably not near as much as everybody thinks. But at the end of the day, I mean, he obviously proved that you can buck that trend and you can win on the draw, because he did. I mean, I watched a lot of different people going through those, and it was just fantastic to watch and learn and to see their their thought, or to hear their thought process as they're talking through their different moves and their different lines that they're trying to build to beat their opponent. And so it's super fun to just be able to to watch those and to gather some insight to try to get better. And so it's really the evolution of the game too, I guess, is just continuing to go, and so it keeps you up on like the newest trends or the newest lines or the newest cards or strategies or decks or whatever you want to call it. But it's just super fascinating, and I've had so much fun like watching from afar to try to garner some insight. But again, I guess that's why we're here, is so that selfishly that I can learn a lot, but hopefully everybody else can too.
I think it's kind of crazy. Like I'm even just looking over. So I track all of my statistics for all of the events that I play in. Yeah. I played in the event over the weekend, the Tia event.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, like, huge shout out to Tia Busen. Like, she's been such a mainstay in the community running these events, and they just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Like, big props to her. Big shout out. I know that everyone that participates in these events is incredibly thankful for her, everything that she's doing for the community. So I just want to show my appreciation. But looking at some of the statistics, I brought the wrong deck yesterday. I historically play Blue Steel. I've been
Yeah.
playing Blue Steel since the day the game came out. Yeah, I saw a whole new world, and so I come from Magic. I played Magic competitively for about 20 years, and I've played in every single level of Magic you can play. Starting off from playing in my friend's garage to playing local FNMs to grinding invitational qualifiers, PPTQs. I've played in Grand Prix Opens. I've played in Pro Tours. The only level of Magic that I did not ever get the chance to play in was Worlds. I would have loved to have played in Worlds. It was always a goal of mine. It's currently a goal of mine for Lorcana. You know, if I can get a ticket to one of the challenges and hopefully top 8, that's the hard part. If I can get a ticket, which I've been unsuccessful in the 2 times that I've tried. I tried for Atlanta. I tried for Lyle. I was unsuccessful.
You tried for Lyle too?
So here's my thought. If I'm going to be one of the best in the world, I need to have an opportunity on a stage to showcase my skill.
Yeah.
So when I saw the data come out on how many hits the website got, 40,000 hits. Now, some of those I'm sure were refreshes. You know, they're not unique hits, but still, if 40,000, if every person tried 4 times to reload the page, you're still looking at 10,000 people fighting for 512 slots.
Yeah. I mean, it's insane.
Not very good odds.
No. I was unsuccessful too, if it makes you feel any better. And I think there was only 2 people locally out of probably the group of like very standard 16 that we usually see around that are, you know, pretty competitive. Mm-hmm. Got them. And so, yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of unhappy people, that's for sure. But no, I guess that makes sense. You know, if you are trying to be the best and you want to do it, I would love to travel to Europe and to do that. And so
most opportunity to be able to do so. But the big thing, like looking at my statistics, I'm looking at, I won more games on the play than I did, or excuse me, on the draw than I did on the play.
I mean, I've started tracking mine too. I'm like 75 games into tracking mine. I've seen a bunch of people do that, and you know, to try to understand what the weaknesses are and what you're playing, or where your opportunities to get better are, or what, you know, certain archetype of decks continuously beat you. I think it's important to do that. And so, yeah, I think it's crazy that you say that too, because I just started doing it. But yeah, I'm super fascinated to understand, like, you know, what you've learned, or, you know, your insights from doing that.
The biggest thing that I've learned is to take each game in stride. In my younger years, I put a lot of pressure on myself to perform. And I took losses in events very, very harshly. You know, I'd beat myself up about it and, you know, say, yes, I should have done better, or if this had gone differently. And it creates a mental block that causes me to play suboptimally in the coming rounds. Like, for example, yesterday, I started off with a round 1 loss. And when I say a round 1 loss, I got handed my shirt on a plate and had to eat it. I lost 0-2. And I was a little bit upset, but we were playing the new game mode, the 2 game set game mode, and I will say that it is a little more forgiving for going 0-2 because of the bonus point that you get from the games that you do go 2-0. The splitting of games going 1-1 holds significantly less weight, and there's like even more pressure to go 2-0. But I maintained my composure. I stayed calm. The next round, I rattled off a 2-0 win. The round after that, I rattled off a 2-0 win. The round after that, I rattled off a 1-1. And then I lost my second round to, no, I'm not. Kendall Burdett, another really good friend of mine. I actually, for the Charlie's 8K, I stayed with Kendall in Georgia, so big shout out to him. Oh, wow. Thank you for that. Really do appreciate it. He's another incredible player as well. So like losing 0-2 to him like didn't really feel like that bad, because like if I'm gonna lose to somebody, like no, I'm not, beat me up all throughout set 1 on ladder. Like he was my kryptonite on ladder. That dude took more games off of me than probably anyone else on Pixelborn.
So you said you're normally a blue steel player, but didn't bring the blue steel. So what have you bring to the tournament?
I don't even want to say it, man.
Just
I
we
brought
you don't we don't have to, but
I no, I'll say it, but like I'm just not proud of myself for bringing it. I brought like this Emerald Steel mid-range discard list. So very different from the Emerald Steel lists that ended up topping. I was not playing uh like the Cursed Merfolk and the Flynn Riders. I was playing like more of a mid-range kind of style deck that leveraged Bucky's and like the Floodborns. Like you still have the
yeah,
Robin Hood shift line. I was still playing Morphs. You still have Ursula because that card is absurd.
yeah,
And
yep,
then like the Beasts, the Tinkerbells, the Jafars, and then just your typical storm pack or song package of like Let the Storm Rage On, Strength of a Raging Fire, Zeus, Grab Your Swords. And then I also included Sudden Chills and Hypnotize in the deck and was like really trying to go in on the Prince John package.
right,
Um, the first week of the set, myself and Lorcana Bro or Aaron Rubin, however people know him, we were working on the green steel list that Labyrinth TCG found a lot of success with in the first week of set three, but it kind of sputtered out. But there was we had both the Whole New World and Bucky in the deck, and those two cards kind of like go against each other. Like
right.
at you want to make your opponent discard cards, but then you're also giving them like a fresh seven. It is kind of a non-bow.
Yeah.
So like I started working on this deck earlier this week and found really really good success on ladder, and then the team was doing a bit of testing, and the deck felt really really well positioned. And then I brought it, and I got some of the matchups that I wanted to get, and because of like the best of two format, I just kept splitting games, going 1-1, 1-1. Like the last 4 rounds of the event, I went 1-1.
Yeah, it almost seems, and again, I mean, we can get into this a little bit too, because it's obviously really important for anybody else interested in the challenge circuit stuff, being that the best of two and the Swiss now. It seems like in some cases it is better to lose games and be in a position to either 2-0 or 0-2 versus just tying every time, because to your point, that bonus points you get for going 2-0 is very 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 important, it seems like, because the people that won a decent amount and then tied everything else just didn't seem to make that top cut. It seems to be the people that were going 2-0 a bunch, even if they did have a couple losses
Yeah.
in there.
So to like guarantee yourself into like the top contention, I think like we were doing some math through rounds 6, 7, and 8, and we had put like guarantee for top 16 at 18 points plus, which ended up being the case. If you were able to get to 18 points, you were locked for top 16.
Yeah.
17 put you on the bubble, which is where Brennan ended up sitting. Brennan went 4-0-5. So he got 4 rounds that he 2-0'd his opponent. He got 0-2'd 0, and then the other 5, he split games 1-1. Now 5-0-4's was 19 points. What was the one? It was like it was 5-2 and 5-1-3. I think it was no, it was 5-1-2. The math just it's really weird. It's so much more difficult, and like I totally understand where Ravensburger was coming from, that they wanted people to play the game and not play the bracket. Like
Right.
completely understand, completely get that. But like I will never say like you should just tank a game just to take the O2. Like you need every single point. But even more important than needing every single point is needing to get some number between, like, depending on how many rounds the event is. If for instance, yesterday was a 9-round event, to make sure that you would get in, like you needed to 205 times, which is asking a lot.
Yeah.
That is asking a lot. So I think that this format is going to promote more polarizing decks that have polarized matchups, where you bring something that absolutely destroys 3 out of the 4 top decks in the format, and you have one unwinnable matchup, and you just say, okay, I have to get a little bit lucky and dodge that matchup. I think that you're putting significantly more stock in luck and RNG than skill based with the 2 game set format, which I don't necessarily personally like.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good point. Is and I think with as healthy as the meta right now seems to be, with the opportunity to play Steel Song or Blue Steel, or Ruby Amethyst still has its place in the meta as well, and then you have the
Oh, for
the
sure.
Green Steel stuff that like you're talking about. So I think this is the most diverse meta we've had, which makes it
Oh,
even more
100%.
more trouble. Because to your point, like you can either try to be good at everything and then you won a bunch of times, or you can make something polarizing and try to do really well in a couple matchups, and you might tank a couple, but then you're at least 2-0ing a bunch of people. So I think that is really, really solid insight to to be able to try to make something that you have an upper leg on quite a few people, so that you can not have to worry about those matchups. And then the other ones, if you make a bad draw, then you make a bad, or if you get a bad pairing, then you get a bad pairing, and there's not a lot you can do about it. But if you can mitigate those bad pairings, then you might set yourself up for the best chance for success. So
Yeah, I completely agree. Like you have to play to outs. Like, so I always tell people it takes a very specific recipe to win any major event. You cannot have it's three things. You cannot have one out of the three or two out of the three. It requires all three. The first is skill. Obviously, you need to be good at the game to take down any big event. Like you're put time in. The more that you put into the game is the more that the game is going to give back to you. The second thing is the correct meta call. If you are on the right deck for the right weekend and you get the right matchups, you're going to do well. But the third one, and this is the one that you can't control, is luck.
Yeah.
You have to get a little bit lucky. You have to make sure that, you're not low rolling, hitting low variance where you're, like, for instance, in Georgia, I had one single game the entire weekend where I was running a deck with 15 uninkable cards in it. In game 2, I mulligan away 6 cards. The 6 cards that I draw are all uninkable.
Oh no!
And my next 3 draws are also uninkable cards.
No
In
way.
The top 11 cards of my deck, there were 9 uninkables. So I just didn't. Yeah, I just didn't get to play the game.
Yeah, that is bad. I mean, that feels bad. Like that's never a fun feeling for sure. But okay. So let's take a step back here. So why did you decide to take the Emerald Steel over your standard Blue Steel? Or
that's a very good. It's a very good question. So I love Blue Steel. It is my favorite deck. I've been playing it for a really, really long time, even when it wasn't good. Blue Steel has picked up a ton of popularity over the course of the last couple of weeks. Yep. And part of that is, Zephyr, obviously another content creator, has one of the largest followings on Twitch and YouTube, and Sky. Both of them have been like major advocates for Blue Steel, and they hold a lot of sway and weight in, suggesting people play a certain archetype or a certain deck. Yep. So a ton of the top tier players switched over to Blue Steel, and Blue Steel mirrors are almost worse than red purple mirrors set 1.
I think so too. Genuinely.
It's so bad. The mirrors are so bad. Like, your opponent gets 3 Cogsworths. What do? You just lose. Like, you just lose the game. Like, whoever gets more Cogsworths in the mirror match ends up winning. So, like, I didn't want to bring Blue Steel because I thought that it was going to be heavily represented this weekend and just play a bunch of mirror matches. And, like, my first round opponent was, in fact, on Blue Steel. So, like, if I had sleeved up Blue Steel for the day and then, like, my first matchup is a Blue Steel mirror, I would have just, like, not had a good time. It would have set, like, a really negative tone for me for the day. And, like, I honestly didn't know what to play. I was like, this deck tested kind of good. Like, let's see if it's actually worth something, and put it to the test and play it in the event. And, like, it was okay. It was very medium. It was very middle of the pack. Like, it didn't underperform and it didn't overperform.
Yeah, no, I trust me. I think that's very fair, and I know there's a little bit more to it than just this, but on those Blue Steel mirror matches, in my opinion, it's whoever gets the first Cogsworth down, whoever gets the first Cogsworth in play wins. Because then they have the freedom to do so much more with the board. But yeah, so I definitely get that. but yeah, that's I've been playing that pretty heavily since like midway through set two, I would say, maybe even a little early into set two. Just because I really enjoy the steel package. Obviously, like everybody understands, with all the direct damage and direct removal is really strong. And then I've since the very beginning of the set, I think Bell has probably been my favorite card. Just because, again, from like a newbie's perspective, you say you see a caveat where you can get 5 lore in one turn, like not understanding the game at all, and you can say like, oh my god, that's insane, like that sounds like so cool. But then obviously you learn, you learn a lot more of the strategies, and you see a lot of the downsides that the card potentially has, and how it with the 4 health and all the removal and blah blah blah, it's a lot more situational than just overly busted. But anyways, with that said, I've been a pretty long-term blue steel player now at this point as well. I haven't been having near as much success this turn, having near as much success this time, which is kind of why I was just ranting and you reached out. But yeah, I just, give me some of your insight into why you like that deck so much, and how kind of, the high level thought process behind it. And we can kind of go from there.
So the original idea for Zoolander in set 1 came for 3 reasons. The first reason was a whole new world.
Yep.
So a whole new world, you guys may often hear people refer to it as Wheel. And the reason is because there was a card in Magic the Gathering called Wheel of Fortune, which was each player discards their hand, draws 7 cards. Yep. The card was broken. It was so incredibly broken, so bad to the point where they had to ban the card. The card got banned in every single format in Magic because it was too good and enabled very, very degenerate strategies. So, like, here comes Lorcana. Not only does it give you a wheel, but it's free. It's free. It's a song. I don't know why they did that. Yeah. Why would you make a free Wheel of Fortune? So, like, I already knew. I was like, all right, this is going to be one of the best cards in the game until they end up eventually banning it, which I think it likely is the one card that I would say, like, if there was a ban and it was a whole new world, I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, I get that. So, like, that card, obviously, first thing I wanted to do. So, like, all right, I know that I want a wheel. How do I abuse this? Oh, Fishbone Quill. An absurd ramp tool. So, I can convert my first hand into an ink advantage and then refresh with a new hand where I'm playing bigger and badder and meaner things than my opponent is playing. What's a payoff, too? What's a good payoff? Bell, strange but special. I'm ramping and like just converting my hand into my inkwell. Bell is like the perfect payoff for it. So like Bell was a big part of the strategy through sets 1 and 2. Set 3, there were 2 cards that really kind of made me had to rethink the blue steel strategy. And the first one was Kit Cloud Kicker. The second one was Medusa. Those 2 cards like have completely changed the makeup of the metagame. You can no longer play these like do nothing things that can either get bounced and cause a tempo loss or just straight up get removed by like a Medusa. It kind of like, you remember in set 2, Teeth and Ambitions was like the premier removal spell.
Sure.
So as a way to counteract that, people started playing X3s, things with at least 3 strength. Yep. You couldn't play the 2/2 goons anymore because they were just getting teethed and causing a tempo loss. Right. So same thing. Medusa has adjusted the meta to make people start reconsidering 3 strength or lower characters as like their top end. People have been moving to things that have 4 or 5 strength so that they just blank the Medusa. And because of that, people start cutting and start trimming back on Medusas. We had replaced Bell with McDuck Manor as another viable threat in the blue steel deck that is very, very difficult to deal with. Yep. And it was great, don't get me wrong. But as Kit kind of started to fall out of the meta, and as Medusa is also starting to fall out of the meta, Bell's starting to creep its way back in. And then we have Lucky Dime. Lucky Dime is such a bonkers card. Oh my
Yes, it
gosh.
is.
Lucky Dime's absurd. It's
Yeah,
so good.
yeah.
It's so good.
When I first saw Lucky Dime way back when they announced it, I was like, this is insane. The difference between me and you is I started to try to build around it, and I don't really know what I'm doing yet, and so I never could really get it figured out. And then once I start seeing lists that had a lot of success with Lucky Dime, it was like, oh, I get it now. Now I see why this works, and what I was trying didn't work. And so yeah, I think the dime is very solid because all of those, all of those cards that you're talking about, McDuck Manor, Lucky Dime, like all of these things, they put clocks on the game, right? And so anytime you can put a clock on your opponent, it puts a ton of pressure on them. And then obviously you have, the clock on yourself, it's like, hey, you see this dime, I can win in 2 turns. What are you going to do about it? So I really like that.
And that's the thing, it puts this inevitability factor. You're playing steel, so you can deal with the board very, very effectively. You've got tools like Tinkerbell, and then along came Zeus, Grab Your Swords, Hook Smee, these things that are going to maintain board control for you. And then you also have just this inevitability button. You're going to pay 2 every single turn. You're going to gain somewhere between 2 to 5 lore every turn passively off of this item, which is also the reason why cards like Benja and Judy Hopps are starting to see significantly more play, because the blue steel and the red blue decks that are trying to abuse Lucky Dime were dominating the meta up until just a couple of days ago.
Yep. Yeah, it's crazy how fast some of this stuff turns, because our local tournament, the last one that I did was 2 weekends ago, and 4 of the top 5 players were on the Ruby Dime deck, and it was just impossible. And then I think everybody was kind of heading that direction, and so now aggro is making a big comeback because those decks have a hard time dealing with the aggression, because they take 3 or 4 turns to ramp up to get to those really important cards, and in that time you have Merfolk and Flynn Rider and some of your Amber and Amethyst stuff, doing a bunch of shenanigans to get lore quick, and it makes it hard. So it's just, to me, it's fascinating how fast this meta can just change like overnight, because people are like countering everything that's going on so fast.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with Pixelborn specifically.
Yeah.
Had it not been for Pixelborn, but another huge shout out to Pavel.
For sure.
Pavel has single-handedly kept this game going through some very, very difficult early supply chain issues that they had, which is to be expected with a new TCG, especially with a major IP like Disney. Like, no one could have anticipated the amount of support that this game was going to garner in such a short period of time.
Right.
But Pixelborn, so here's the thing that I recognized, especially through set 1 specifically, was that the Pixelborn meta would dictate the paper meta. Paper, people were maybe playing once a week or once every 2 weeks, so you're not changing as quickly. You're not getting the number of games in that you can on a digital platform. Yeah. You have grinders on Pixelborn that will play the game for 8, 10, 12 hours a day, play thousands and thousands of games a season, that you have to adapt when you're playing against the same, especially for like the top grandmasters. Like, we play against each other constantly, like over and over and over again. So like, we have our own meta. Like, if I'm queuing up into Zephyr, like, I have a deck that this is the deck I'm going to play when I play against Zephyr. I queue up into Lux Ferranti, like, this is the deck I'm going to play if I have 6 different variations of blue steel, and most of them are like specifically for an individual. Like, I'm not gearing towards any specific meta. Like, I'm playing against very specific people, and I'm like playing a deck that's specific to like play against them. But paper meta shifts happen significantly slower than Pixelborn meta shifts. Paper meta shifts, they're usually anywhere between 3 to 4 weeks behind the Pixelborn meta. So like, if you guys aren't playing Pixelborn and you want to get a lot of high quality games in a short amount of time without leaving your own home, download Pixelborn, start grinding. I'll see you on the ladder. Get up to Grandmaster with me. Like, have fun. The more you put into this game and any other TCG, the more that you are going to get out of it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything you said. The one thing I will say though is like locally we have probably I would say probably the top 5 people all are at least maybe they don't grind it, but are at least very aware of what's going on and what's performing well, so that they can like base their decisions off of that. And so I would say our local meta is shifts fairly quickly with that as well because of that. But yes, I couldn't agree more. Is that the online like sharing of information is just completely exacerbates everything, because everyone has the information at what's going on and what's winning and what's not, so that they can make those shifts fast if you are up on the know and what's going on and what the big online tournaments are doing, or what the regional tournaments that other people are going to is performing well, and you can copy what they're doing. And in a different world where we don't have that speed of information share, then yes, nothing is near as quick, and you have a lot of time to train and to get up good on one thing before it starts to shift again.
It's so easy to fall behind. Like there have been like periods of time where I'm in the top 25 ladder, and I'll take 3 days off. 3 days off just because like I've got things going on in personal life, or like I've got some big deliverables in work, so I'm putting in significantly more hours in work. And just don't have time to play. And I'll come back after a 3-day stint. I'm no longer in top 25. Like the barrier to entry into top 25 is like 100 ELO points away or something ridiculous like that. Yeah. And then on top of that, the meta is completely shifted. Like I have to think, breathe, sleep, eat, drink, Lorcana, like 100% of the time to like continue to stay relevant, to like continue to try and not only be on top of the meta, but ahead of the meta. And I think that that's what separates some people. Like for instance, Zan Saeed figured out flutes long before anyone else did in set 3, and ends up taking down the 8K with flutes on like just this insane list with like 21 uninkables, which was like unheard of up until that point. But it worked for him.
Yep.
It was crazy.
Okay, so with that said, let's talk about some of these matchups and some of these decks, and talk about some of the consistency things, or what if you're looking at going to your local set championship, what maybe not you specifically, but in general, like what people should consider bringing. And I think starting with Blue Steel is probably the place to go, since that's your expertise. What's the overall strategy on Blue Steel? You kind of covered that. It's you have the ramp available, then you can a whole new world into a new set of cards, and hopefully outpace your opponent that way. What's the catch on Blue Steel? Like, where can you get hung up, or where can you lose? What can your opponent do to beat you? And what should people playing Blue Steel be like concerned with going into the matchup?
Yeah, so for starters, I think if you're preparing for set championships, or you're preparing for challenges, you need to consider what's the strongest things that you can do in Lorcana currently. And when you think about decks that are in the meta, I think everyone can agree the top 4 decks in the current meta right now are Amber Steel, Blue Steel, Red Purple, and Red Blue. So Blue Steel specifically, you are being able to abuse a whole new world alongside of ramp. Some of the things that can go wrong is either A, not having early interaction with aggressive strategies. You can just get absolutely run over because your opponent goes, Merfolk on 1, 2 Merfolk on 2, and you didn't have a Captain Hook or a Smee to kind of combat the board. So by the time you start interacting with them, they're already at 15, 16 lore, and it makes it very, very difficult to kind of come back from that type of lore deficit. You can also just not ramp. Like that is something that happens like pretty frequently. Like you're playing 4 Fishbone Quill and typically 3 Mickey Mouse Detective. I know that some people like Civis have opted instead of the Mickey Mouse Detective, they've opted for 1 Jump Ahead, which is really kind of cool because they're playing a little bit more 4 drops. They're playing the whole package of and then along came Zeus, and really kind of banking on that as their premier removal tool. You know, they want to go Popsicle on one jump on two, Flavershim on three, draw two cards, and then the Flavershim can be used to sing the Along Came Zeus on turn 4 or later. But in your traditional blue steel style decks, you want to curve appropriately. You want to have, you know, either Popsicle or Captain Hook on one, Mr. Smee on two, or, you know, a second Popsicle if your opponent's not presenting any additional aggression. And then the ramp on three is the deck's bread and butter. You have to be able to jump from 3 to 5 because you want to play a 5-drop on 4. Either, you know, a Beast, Audrey Ramirez, Cogsworth, Beast Hard-Headed, something that you can sing your whole new world. It can also go very, very south and sideways if you're playing against either Amber or Emerald, because they each have cards that can stop you from doing what you want to do. You've got two drop Ursula can take the whole new world out of your hand, and it's like, oh cool, I've now converted my hand into my inkwell, and now they took away my refill and they've got a full grip. And Amber has bare necessities. They can actually just take your ramp. They can take the fishbone quill out of your deck. So like against those two strategies, two things that I think are incredibly important, specifically against Amber decks that have the bare necessities in them. Number one, if you're going to keep Fishbone Quill in your opener, make sure you have 2 of them. If not, you know, Mickey Mouse has been something I've been leaning a little bit more heavily on in the Emerald and the Amber matchups. I've been leaning significantly heavier on the characters and trying to blank cards like Ursula and bare necessities from being able to gain any value and cause a tempo loss for your opponent. Or I've had games where I've kept, then this is going to sound a little wild, I've kept 2 whole new worlds in my opener.
Yeah,
I mean, guaranteed.
Yeah,
like,
you know,
I'm just trying not to get got. Like, and you could also, like, say you have, like, they're going to hold their Ursula or their bare necessities for the turn before you're going to do the thing. And another adaptation that I've had is foregoing playing the 5-drop on turn 4 and just hard casting the whole new world to just get me a new hand.
Right.
Just to like guarantee that I'm able to do it. Obviously, you want to be able to sing it so that you can get first advantage with, you know, a fresh hand and your inkwell being unexerted.
Yeah, it's crazy that the first example you gave of what could give the deck problems is Merfolk and then Flynn, or Merfolk, because in that tournament, that local tournament I was telling you about, that's the only game I lost was to Emerald Steel, and the opponent opened Merfolk. And
yeah, so, you can absolutely lose those games, man.
Yeah,
like,
and I genuinely didn't know what to do. I was like, do I take this out and have no cards and just hope for the best, or do I let them get to, you know, 14 or 16 and then hope I get a Tinkerbell by that time to where I can clear the board and be down 16? And so, you know, I chose the line to try to deal with it. And then, you know, from there, I didn't have any cards because, you know, they have Ursula and all the other stuff where they can keep ripping your cards. But I think the biggest trouble that I've had with Blue Steel has definitely been the aggression side, to your point, and the bare necessities lines, because they can keep you from doing the things that are most important. And so, yeah, hearing your kind of counters to that, and either, you know, keeping 2, which is very counterintuitive, especially since they're uninkable, or keeping 2 fishbones, or, you know, whatever the case might be, if that, you know, comes to be the starting hand. It makes a lot of sense, and it helps you, you know, deal with some of those early game troubles that you might find yourself in.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, so like you play very differently against green decks and against yellow decks. Against yellow decks, I lean significantly heavier on going Popsicle, Smee, Mickey, Haram. Yeah. To try to find the whole new world. I want to find the whole new world on my turn. I want it to be in my deck. I don't want it to be in my hand. I want to try to blank bare necessities as much as humanly possible. Right. Like I don't want them to get value out of that card. Ursula is a lot easier to play around because you can just mulligan your you just mulligan all of your songs, and then if you end up drawing songs and they're inkable, you just ink them. and just make it like they're going to play it because they have to. They're forced to play it. But it's up to you to decide whether or not they're going to get value out of playing it.
Yep. Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that you have to be very aware of the play
we have a
style
very
and
limited
be
card
very
pool right now.
cognizant
So
of
like
the way
in
that you're
sets
going
1
into
and
the
set
matchup,
2, you
because I
couldn't
think that
really
was
focus
probably
on
one of the bigger
trying
issues
to
that I
answer
had early
everything
on
that
in the
your
game.
opponent could do. You
Like
really
set
kind of
one,
hyper
beginning
fixated
set
on like
two
what was
is
your win condition,
trying to
like how
play
did you
each
win the
matchup
game?
the
Like red
same,
purple for
and
instance,
not realizing that
was,
even though you have the same
control
cards,
the
like you're
board as
trying to
much
do
as
different
possible,
things
ink
with
till
those
you
cards
have
depending on
19
what your
ink and
opponent
get
is
to
doing.
these like late stage
And
points
I don't
in the
think that
game
was
where you
wrong
could pull
in
off
set
this
1 or set 2.
ridiculous
I mean,
combo
we have
of
such a
Elsa
limit.
into
Like, that's the other thing.
Aladdin,
This is only a
give
3-set
it rush and then untap it and like throw these big like 4 to 8 point swings in the game. And that was like how the deck won. Now there's significantly more deck diversity in playable decks. You have a lot of, I think that we already said, the top 4. I would say that those are probably the tier 1 decks, but like you have decks that are also tier 2 that can just steal games. Like you have, green purple aggro. Look at Artabax. Artabax made it to the finals today on a deck that most people had shunned off as unplayable. Most people said green purple aggro is unplayable. You can't play Ursulas, you can't play Kits, and Artabax ends up going to the finals and ends up losing to Brennan, which like Artabax, you should be incredibly proud of yourself for your accomplishments. Like when I go to locals, the only person I lose to is Brennan. Like he's just built different, man. Like the dude he's an animal. I've known, tons of pro players across a bunch of different TCGs. I think arguably Brennan is the best card game player I've ever known in my entire life. Like,
Yeah,
I'm not even close. Like,
yeah, he's definitely towards the top. I mean, hey, I take your opinion with way more weight than mine, but he's definitely one of the best that I've seen play, because it's just like you see the results of all these tournaments and his name's always up there. And so
always.
Yeah, it has to be. But okay, so the whole point of this. So when do you cast a whole new world and when do you not?
So it's gonna be matchup dependent. There are some matchups where you will not cast a whole new world at all.
Okay.
And I know that sounds kind of crazy, but against your more aggressive strategy decks, if you're playing against green purple bounce, the only time you're going to whole new world is if your opponent ends up getting an Ursula to Sing of Friends and they just draw 4 cards and they've got 8 or 9 cards in hand. Sure. Fire off the wheel, make them discard it. Against like Mufasa decks, you're never gonna wheel.
Nope.
Nope. If you wheel against a Mufasa deck, like you probably lose that game. One of the most important aspects to wheel, it's kind of hard to like generalize it because there are a variety of different wheel decks out there, and they all wheel for different reasons. Like Amber Steel, for instance, having access to a turn 2 wheel, if you're on the play, can essentially undo a mulligan. Like you could be against a red-purple opponent that mulligan for something very, very specifically to interact with you in a very specific way, and you could just go queen on 1, shift queen on 2, sing wheel to undo what they did, and hope that you just give them a really, really bad hand. Right. So that's one specific use case. Ultimately, when you're using wheel, you want it to get some value, whether it's undoing your opponent's mulligan, whether you have first access to a new hand with full ink. So singing it is very, very important, which is what Blue Steel tries to do. Blue Steel tries to ramp, get a singer in play, sing it, ramp some more, play the stuff from your hands. You often don't want to be forced into a situation where you have to hard cast it and you use up all of your ink for the turn. So it's cool, you just drew 7 cards, but you just gave your opponent 7 cards, and they get to play with those cards before you do.
Right.
When your opponent is in low resource games, so this happens with red purple, where they're forced to interact with what you're doing because you're applying a significant amount of pressure. Holding wheel and wheel timing is one of the most important aspects of any wheel deck. You'll constantly see me either in tournaments or when I'm streaming where I have wheel in hand and it looks like why isn't he wheeling? Well, it's because my opponent only has 1 to 2 or 3 cards in hand, and I've got a Flaversham popsicle going on where I can get card advantage. I'm not going to give you access to additional cards until I absolutely have to. And then they play a rabbit, and then they bounce the rabbit, and then they play a friends, and now they've got 5 or 6 cards in hand. Okay, cool. I can ink a card for turn, ink with a fishbone quill, get down to only 2 cards. I'm discarding 1 card, you're discarding 5 to 6 cards. Like, that's another instance where if you're consistently making them discard between 4, 5, 6, or plus amount of cards in their hands, then wheel. It's worthwhile to wheel at that point because you're taking out threats that you no longer have to deal with.
Right. So what about the situations where like you're both in a bad spot? Like maybe you've only got like, a whole new world and maybe one other card and you don't have any other draw options and your opponent's in a bad spot too. Like that's where I always feel like I make the most mistakes is it's like, I don't have a really good play, but I don't want to cast a whole new world because they get as much advantage out of it as I do. Like, in some of those like sticky type of situations, is that just kind of like I don't want to say a gut call, but is that kind of just like an in the moment call given like the board state and everything? Or, how do you deal with like the situations where you're in a bad spot and it's not the best play, but that's like really all you got? If that makes sense.
It's highly contextual. You have to look at a few different things. There's a couple of different ways that you can gain an advantage in this game. One of them is on just resources, just cards in general. Getting ahead of your opponent in card advantage can often lead to a win. Ink advantage, you get to play with bigger and better cards faster than your opponent does. Board presence is another type of advantage. So, if you're behind on board, you're behind on ink, you're behind on lore, wheeling is kind of a double-edged sword. You're going to give them more resources to just win faster, but you could also potentially give yourself an opportunity. Like if you're not winning the game as it stands, sure, fire off the wheel. If you're even with your opponent, I'd rather trust my top decks, to be perfectly honest.
No, that's the insight I want. Yeah, no, I like it.
We have things like Beast. We have things like Popsicle Haram to be able to develop our own card advantage while not giving our opponent's card advantage. If you have board control, fire it off. Fire off that wheel because you're just going to continue to press your advantage.
Right.
But if you have board control at that point, there's probably no reason for you to wheel. Just turn your dude sideways. Don't give them any outs. It's highly contextual. Like if you're playing against red purple and they've only cast 1 Be Prepared and they've got 26 cards left in their deck, you've got board, you probably don't want to wheel because the chances that they're going to hit a Be Prepared to just like clear the board and now they just have a fresh hand to start slamming goat, fox, snake, rabbit bounce nonsense. Like it's purely contextual. If you have to determine what is your path to victory. If you're at 15, you got nothing in play, and you've got 9, 13, 8, you got 18 ink, and you're like, fire off this wheel. I need to hit exactly Lucky Dime Bell, and I win the game on the spot. Like you have to play to the outs too. Like sometimes it's worth taking the risk to give yourself the greatest percentage chance to win the game.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And the sticky situations that I find myself in, and I like hearing you say that top decking is sometimes the play because it feels bad in the moment, but knowing that like that's the right line gives you more confidence to just kind of stick to that situation. Because again, I'll find myself where I don't have a popsicle on board and I have a Hiram and I'm trying to, top deck for a popsicle or something along those lines. And it's like, well, I could just wheel and try to get myself there. But to your point, that's not always necessarily the way to go because then obviously you're giving your opponent that advantage too. And so it gives me more confidence, I guess, knowing that even though it might be a sticky situation, that it's better to try to just stick it out in that bad situation versus, giving your opponent a fresh hand too of opportunities to deal with. So, okay. Yeah, no, but I think that helps a ton. So, I mean, I know we're getting closer to time here, but I want to get your take on some of the other three tier one decks that you mentioned, just to give everyone listening kind of some insight, if that's what they like to play, on how to maybe, you play it just a tad bit better. So you started talking about Amber Steel a little bit. So if you could just give, a couple pointers on Amber Steel, then yeah, we can go from there.
Yeah, the first thing you need to ask yourself is A, do you want to play flutes, or B, do you want to play lantern? And both of them are going to have trade-offs.
Yep.
With lanterns, you're going to be better against the aggressive style decks because you can just go over the top of them with, significantly more Cinderella Stout-Hearteds, Surfer Stitches, Rapunzels. The flutes are real, like in a red-purple dominated meta. Red Purple has no way to interact with Sleepy's flute. So while you may not have board control because of their Be Prepareds and their Medusas, you just have this inevitability clock of being able to get to the board really early, get some early chip damage in, fire off a wheel, find your flutes, and just continuously play a song every single turn. They're two very, very different play styles. However, they're both very good at resource denial. Denying your opponent their side of the board, denying cards in your opponent's hand, denying, items and other types of permanents that your opponent can have in play. They have arguably the best shift lines in the game. You just have some of the best shift lines: Cinderellas, the Queens, Robin Hoods. These are all staples. They're all mainstays. You have all of the best, single target board removal tools and Strength of a Raging Fire, Let the Storm Rage On, and then along came Zeus. And not only you don't have Be Prepared, but you have Tank Grab Your Swords, which is like a one-sided board wipe, which is arguably better.
Yep.
I think Amber Steel is incredibly, incredibly well positioned right now, specifically because of the bare necessities being as good as it is at disrupting your opponent's plan.
Okay, so tell me this, and then we can move on to the next one. What's Amber Steel's best matchup, and what's Amber Steel's worst matchup?
Amber Steel's best matchup is likely aggro. If you're playing against the green purple bounce deck, sure. Draw a million cards, don't care, gonna wheel you. Play an X1, cool. I play Cinderella, sing Let the Storm Rage On, draw a card. You want to see aggro on the lantern variant. Even the flute variant does well. Flute definitely wants to play against red purple. You do not want to see red blue. Red blue's probably your worst matchup because they're ramping alongside you. One of the worst things for a Steel Song deck to do is to try to wheel, but if your opponent is ramping alongside you, if you have lanterns and they have Fishbone Quill, the beauty about wheel is when you're able to more effectively use your hand. If you can hand dump and then wheel and get a fresh 7, if your opponent's doing that alongside of you and ramping in the process, it's going to be a bad time for you.
Right. The one thing I will say about that, though, is if you are on, the bare necessities line and you're able to, take their fish bones away from them and keep them from ramping, then maybe you do have that opportunity to have a successful matchup. But obviously that's, again, very contextual. Okay. So we said the first two. What was the next one?
Red purple.
Yes. Red purple.
So red purple is hyper consistent. It's probably the deck that has the highest level of consistency of doing what it is designed to do, which is to control the board, get incremental chip damage, and get to a point where they can win off of the back of Goat Bounce Goat.
Yep.
That's what the deck is designed to do. It does it very, very effectively. The deck is still incredibly good. Do not get me wrong. It does have some polarizing matchups. The hardest thing for it to deal with is the inevitability clock of Lucky Dime. Also, a little bit play draw dependent against the Lucky Dime style decks because sometimes red purple can just go 1-drop on 1, 2 more 1-drops on 2, and they just run over the red blue opponent before the red blue opponent starts to do anything relevant. They're drawing cards and ramping in the first few turns of the game and have no board presence, and red purple has a lot of board presence.
Yep.
I think it's a very, very strong best of three deck. If your set championships are going to be best of three, red purple should definitely be in your consideration. In best of two, the thing that I fear the most is that there are some matchups that are just unwinnable on the draw. And red purple is likely one of those decks that has the highest percentage chance of going 1-1 more frequently than other decks.
Yeah, I think that's fair. You know, in the to your point on like the Ruby Sapphire matchup, if you can get like, you know, a mini, a Cusco, and a Maleficent out versus having to, you know, continuously bounce your characters because that's all you've got, I think the mulligan's pretty important into your opponent on that one.
Yep, totally agree. If
okay.
you're able to go like Olaf, Cusco, Surfer Mini, like you're probably winning that game.
Yeah, for sure. Because Surfer Mini is pretty hard for Ruby Sapphire to take out until they get to a fish hook maybe, or a be prepared or something along those lines. But yes, it's definitely later in the game until they can start interacting with that. But okay, you've kind of touched on this, but I'll ask the same question because I think it's pretty relevant to just make it cut and dry. What's red purple's best matchup and what's red purple's worst matchup?
Its best matchup is probably Steel Decks. Medusa kills all the good stuff. Beast. Robin Hood. Yep. Like it wants to see the Steel Decks. Its worst matchup is probably again either discard. Discard can just get them. Like the Bucky discard. That was the reason why that I ended up playing Emerald Steel this weekend and also did very well into every red purple opponent. Besides, no, I'm not because he's just built different. Like you're gonna struggle if they start attacking your hand. It can be. It can be kind of difficult. The other thing is it does run like a pretty high uninkable count, so like your own deck can just beat you sometimes. And I think that the mirror is probably one of the worst matchups because it's very difficult to navigate. It's one of those matchups where it feels incredibly heavily play draw dependent. You know, who finds the spell book first and just you know taps it every single turn. Yeah. That's probably the mirror is probably one of the hardest matchups to navigate, which is why you see such a big bone of contention between whether or not to play Teeth in the deck, because Teeth is not good in the mirror and it's not very good against the red blue deck.
Yeah, that's fun. It's refreshing to hear you say that because I didn't play Ruby Amethyst last set because it was just mirror matchups, and I don't feel like I had the minute details of every single line worked out, which is necessary in such a a back and forth game that you get in those mirrors. So yeah, I agree that those mirrors can be really, really tough for sure.
Whoever B preps first usually loses,
which is crazy to think.
It's crazy. Yes. Like whoever B prepares first ends up losing because like you just give your opponent the first opportunity back to the board. Yeah. And like, what do? You like B prep again? Like you B prep, cool. They play 3 dudes. You're like, oh, yeah. I guess I have to be prepared again. And you're just always playing this like off tempo turn.
I know, it's crazy. I've thought that exact same thing. So it's wild to hear you say that too. But okay, so last deck then you said the Ruby Sapphire Dime deck, correct?
Yeah.
So I'm very familiar with this one because this is what I took to the locals tournament. But again, just want to get your kind of 2 cents overview and see why people should or shouldn't play this one.
So it's a ramp deck. You are ramping and you are playing like the best big Unga Boonga cards in the game. Maleficent Dragons, Tamato is like, if you want to play the biggest, baddest Mama Jammas in the game, like red blue is definitely for you. You're going to beat up on a lot of the steel decks because what you're doing is just significantly more powerful, backed by the fact that you're also just a be prepared deck. You're also going to be very good into the whole new world decks because one thing that the deck struggles with is card advantage. The deck puts so much heavy reliance on Haram as its primary draw engine, and I know people are like, but wait, R&B, they have Develop Your Brain and Gaston. Those are replacement effects. Those are not actual card advantage. They're just cards that replace themselves. Haram is the only piece of real card advantage in the deck, and the difference between winning and losing games is whether or not you see Haram. And I personally cannot play the deck because of that specifically. Like if you don't see Haram, you're probably losing the game.
Yeah, it's very one-dimensional. And to your point, like you have a lot of cards that replace themselves, but you don't build your hand up unless you're finding him.
Right.
And then you can obviously draw off of popsicles and other items and stuff. But yeah, it's very one dimensional from that respect too. And so, but you
and the
get
deck just hard loses the aggro.
Yeah,
Like, the deck hard loses the aggro.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is, again, our locals, and understanding the meta is important, like you've said too. And our locals was very, very Ruby Dime a couple weeks ago, and now it's starting to get aggro to deal with that. And so now it's, kind of falling itself out of the local scene because of that reason. And so, not being able to do anything until turn 4 or 5 is really, really not fun if you're going up against Merfolk.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, it sounds like you should be playing Lantern Steel Song in your local meta currently then.
That's kind of where what I'm thinking. I've just never been the best Steel Song player because, I don't know. I think the wheel's involved, and I think, again, going back to like when's the right time to wheel is important. But yeah, it's getting to aggro and it's getting to Emerald Steel, and so you have, which is still relatively aggro with the Merfolk, but then you have the discard aspect of it too. And so, yeah, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that one out. But before we move on to that real fast, let's say, so what is Ruby? I mean, you kind of already touched on it, but what's Ruby Sapphire's best matchup and what's Ruby Sapphire's worst matchup?
Best matchup is probably Steel Song, or even Blue Steel. Blue Steel, I wouldn't say it's probably even. Amber Steel is probably Ruby Sapphire's best matchup because you're just doing bigger and better things and be preparing them. Your worst matchup is likely the green purple aggro bounce deck. Like you're just struggling against Curse Merfolk or any deck that's playing like Lilo, Maleficent, anything that's playing one of those 1-drop set quests for 2. Any aggressive, so yellow purple hyper aggro, like those are likely very, very bad matchups for that deck.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean that, and again, I think I got really lucky because I didn't play any aggro that day. But knowing that it is shifting a little bit is definitely important to do. So let's just end on this. Let's say any final, just like overarching kind of tips or tidbits that you can give people to think about as they're going into the set championships and things to consider as they're trying to decide what to play or how they want to go about getting into, their Stitch playmats and cards.
Yeah, I will always say that comfortability on what you're playing is the most important aspect. Anything can win an event, realistically. If you're playing any one of those top 4 decks, any one of them has a decent shot. And even some of the tier 2 decks have a decent shot of winning any event. You got to be good. You got to pick the right deck. You got to be a little bit lucky. You definitely have to be a little bit lucky. But understanding how your deck wins the game is one of the most important things. If you're one of those people that will bounce around from deck to deck to deck and not spend any real amount of time on them, you're likely not going to do well in a hyper competitive situation. My suggestion is for you to pick a specific deck, get as many games in as humanly possible against a wide variety of decks, start to understand the matchups that you're good in and how you win those games, and the matchups where you're bad in and what your path to victory is in those. I will always say that take whatever you're best at, because I would rather have you play a deck at 95% perfect versus picking up another deck that you think is really good and playing it 60% perfect, because you're going to do better on the 95 than you are on the 60.
Yeah, I know. I've had that issue, and a little bit I couldn't have dealt with it. Like in set 1, I didn't have a playset of Rapunzel's as much as I wanted to play Amber at the time. Without Rapunzel, it was kind of impossible to do so because she was so incredibly important there. But yeah, I would completely agree with that, is that I've, found myself bouncing around in the beginning and not really being comfortable on anything. And so I found a lot more success as I have gotten into that area where I do feel really comfortable and I know what I'm trying to do and I know, what I need to do next to be able to get there. And so, yeah, I would second that as well, that the comfort, or at least knowledge, if you're picking up a deck for the first time and you don't even really know what's coming, then it's going to be impossible to be successful at. And so, I think that's, very important to consider too. But I think that wraps up all the questions I have for you. Is there anything else you'd like to say, or, to shout out or I mean, to give before we head out here?
Yeah, for those of you that are looking to consume high quality, information, there's a lot of resources that are out there to your advantage. For those of you that are on Discord, 20lore.pro is amazing community with over 3,000 members that post, about deck lists. They have deck discussions. One of the most active communities out there right now for very high level gameplay. I would suggest, if you're looking to consume as much information as you humanly can about the state of the current meta, look at some spicy deck lists. That's definitely a place. They've also got, some options for coaching. Any of the big streamers that are out there, like Wonderland, Zephyr, myself, try to consume as much of the content as humanly possible as you're starting to prepare for set championships. Take a second to kind of see how we interact with certain games and certain matchups and in certain situations to see if, maybe we do something a little bit differently than you would do in a certain situation, and see if you might be able to learn something that way. Yeah, that's really it, man. Just keep playing the game. That's the biggest thing. The more games you play, the better you're going to get at whatever strategy it is that you're trying to win the game with.
Well, I appreciate it, and I can't let you leave here without shouting yourself out. So where can people find you if they want to follow you and follow your tips and tricks and your stream or whatever it is? Like where can people find you online to follow you?
Yeah, so I am on Twitter, or X, whatever it's called this week. It's at R_M_BX. And then I do also stream on Twitch. This one is a little bit different. It's R__M__B. I hate that that's my URL because it was my old handle. But yeah, those are the two places you can find me. You can also find me in the 20 Lore Pro Discord server. You can also, join Labyrinth TCG's Patreon, get early access to all of Labyrinth TCG's spicy deck lists and podcasts, and we write articles, we do coachings. I mean, whatever you want to put into the game is what you're going to get out of the game. There's a lot of resources out there for you.
Well, I appreciate the time. Seriously, thank you so much. It helped me a ton, and I'm sure it helped out a ton of people as well. And so we're super appreciative for you coming on and taking the time to talk to us. And I would imagine we're going to get some incredible feedback because every guest we've had thus far has we've had basically a curtain call for. So if you ever want to come back and have another conversation with us, we'll definitely have you anytime. So thanks again for coming, and we'll have you back whenever you would like.
Really appreciate it, brother. Hope to see you at some of these big challenges coming up.
I hope so as well. All right. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch you next time.